I never thought I'd be the one to find lipstick on a collar. It's such a cliché, isn't it? But there it was, bright red against white cotton, so vivid it seemed to mock me. 20 years of marriage, and Mark reduced our vows to a stain. The signs had been there for months. Late nights at the office. The new cologne I never bought him. The way he angled his phone away when texts came through. I told myself I was being paranoid. Told myself that marriages hit rough patches, that we would smooth ours out like we always had. That Tuesday morning, I was simply doing laundry, one of those mundane tasks that anchors a normal life. I almost missed it, almost tossed his shirt into the washing machine without a second glance. But something made me pause. Perhaps some dormant instinct finally waking up. And there it was, that crimson smudge. Not my shade, not my kiss. My hands trembled as I set the shirt aside. I finished the laundry with mechanical precision, my mind racing ahead of my body. Who was she? How long had it been going on? Did everyone know but me? I folded his underwear, paired his socks, all while imagining him with someone else. Someone younger? Someone who hadn't watched her body change with age and childbirth? Someone who hadn't put her career on hold to raise his children? When Mark came home that evening, I had dinner ready as usual. Our daughter Emily was at college, and our son Jack was at basketball practice. Just the two of us, like when we first started dating. He kissed my cheek, a dry, perfunctory peck, and asked about my day as he loosened his tie. "Found something interesting in the laundry," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'd placed the shirt on the kitchen counter, the collar facing up. His face gave everything away before he could speak. First confusion, then recognition, then panic. Not guilt, just fear of being caught. "Deb, it's not what you think. Don't." The word cut through the air like a blade. "Don't insult me by lying." It was just once. A mistake. At the conference in Boston. Stop. I held up my hand. "Was it her lipstick on your collar last month too? And the perfume on your jacket? In December?" The color drained from his face. He hadn't realized I'd noticed those things. That I'd been collecting evidence while convincing myself I was wrong. "Who is she?" I asked. "No one you know." His voice was quiet now, resigned. "Someone from work." "How long?" He hesitated. 6 months. 6 months. While I was planning our 20th anniversary party. While I was helping Jack with college applications. While I was visiting my mother in the hospital after her stroke. "Do you love her?" I didn't know why I asked. The answer wouldn't change. Anything. Mark stared at the floor. "I don't know." Something broke inside me then. Not my heart, but something harder and more fundamental. Trust, perhaps. Or the belief that I knew the man I'd shared my life with. "I want you to leave," I said. "Tonight." "Deb, please. We can work through this." "Can we?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. Searching for the man I married. "Do you even want to?" His silence was answer enough. He packed a bag while I sat at the kitchen table, still as stone. When he left, the door closing behind him with a soft click, I didn't cry. Not yet. First, I poured myself a glass of the wine we'd been saving for our anniversary. Then I called my sister, my voice finally breaking as I spoke the words aloud. "Jane, Mark's been having an affair." Only after I hung up did I allow the tears to come, hot and bitter, staining my own collar as the truth sank in. My marriage had ended long before I found that lipstick stain. Sleep became a stranger after Mark left. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our marriage, searching for clues I'd missed. The empty side of the bed seemed to expand each night. a growing void that echoed with his absence. Not that I wanted him back. The betrayal had severed something irreparable between us, but I mourned the life I thought we had. Telling the children was the hardest part. Jack, 18, and already defensive of me, wanted to confront his father immediately. I had to talk him down, remind him that rage wouldn't heal any of us. Emily came home from college for the weekend, her eyes red-rimmed before she even walked through the door. News travels fast when whispered through family phone calls. "Did you have any idea?" Emily asked as we sat at the kitchen table, the three of us sharing a pizza no one really wanted to eat. I shook my head. I saw signs. I chose to ignore them. "That's not on you, Mom," Jack said fiercely. "He's the one who broke his promises." I reached for his hand, squeezed it gently. "It's never that simple, honey." But in some ways, it was. Mark had made choices that destroyed our family. Every time he met her, every lie he told, every moment he chose her over us. Those were deliberate acts, not accidents. The clarity of this understanding washed over me in waves, sometimes bringing anger, sometimes a strange relief. At least now I knew the truth. Mark moved into an apartment downtown. He called daily at first, his voice strained with what sounded like regret. I kept our conversations brief, focused on practical matters. Finances, the kids, the house. He wanted to talk about us, about what went wrong, but I couldn't bear his confessions or excuses. Not yet. The woman's name was Claire. She was 34, 13 years younger than me, and worked in marketing at Mark's firm. I learned this from Jane, who heard it from Mark's brother. Everyone seemed to know details I didn't, as if my pain made me too fragile for information. I hated being treated like I might shatter, even as I felt myself cracking inside. 1 month after Mark left, I ran into Claire at the grocery store. I recognized her immediately from the company website I'd studied late one night during a particularly low moment. She was beautiful in a polished way. Smooth, dark hair, careful makeup, designer clothes. She saw me too, her eyes widening in recognition or fear. I couldn't tell which. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other across the produce section. Shoppers moving around us like water around stones. I could have caused a scene, could have dumped my basket of vegetables at her feet, could have demanded to know if she'd known about me, about our children, about our 20 years. Instead, I simply nodded at her, a small, civil acknowledgement, and walked away. That night, I called my old law firm. Before the children, I'd been an associate on track for partnership. I'd left with Mark's encouragement, his assurances that his career could support us both. The managing partner, Helen, answered on the second ring. "Deborah Miller," she said warmly. "It's been too long." "Helen, I'm wondering if you're hiring." The words came out before I could second-guess them. There was a pause. "Are you looking to come back?" "Yes," my voice strengthened. "I am." We arranged lunch for the following week. After hanging up, I sat on my bed and finally let myself cry. Not for Mark or our marriage, but for the woman I'd put aside. The lawyer with ambitions and opinions. The woman who didn't define herself by her husband's choices. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later. Mark wanted to split everything equally, a gesture of fairness that somehow felt like another betrayal. He'd broken our vows, but wanted to divide our assets neatly, as if love and betrayal could be quantified in dollar amounts. I called my college roommate, now a divorce attorney in Chicago. "Don't sign anything," she advised. "You gave up your career for him. You're entitled to more than half." I hesitated. "I don't want to fight him." "It's not fighting, Deb. It's standing up for yourself. When was the last time you did that?" Her question lingered long after we ended the call. When had I last stood up for myself? Not when Mark suggested I quit my job. Not when he started working late. Not even when I found that damning lipstick stain. I had spent years accommodating, compromising, smoothing things over. That night, I opened my laptop and began writing my own terms for our divorce. It was time to find my voice again. The law firm hadn't changed much in 15 years. Same mahogany furniture, same framed diplomas lining the walls, same smell of coffee and ambition. But I had changed. The nervous young associate was gone, replaced by a woman who had weathered betrayal and was still standing. Helen looked exactly the same, her silver hair cut in the same precise bob, her handshake firm as ever. "You look good, Deborah," she said, as we settled into a corner table at her favorite bistro. "Liar," I smiled, "but I appreciate it." "I mean it. There's something different about you. More..." She tilted her head, considering. "Substantial." Substantial. Not a word often used to compliment women, but I liked it. Substantial meant weight, presence, significance. After months of feeling invisible in my own marriage, substantial felt like praise. "We can't offer you partner track immediately," Helen said after we ordered. "But we need someone with family law experience. Given your personal situation, you might bring a valuable perspective." My personal situation. A delicate way of saying my husband had left me for a younger woman, and now I was rebuilding my life from scratch at 47. "I'd like to be considered for any position," I said. "I need to work, Helen. Not just for the money, but for me." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Helen had been divorced twice herself. "Start next Monday. We'll figure out the details as we go." Walking back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. I had a purpose again, beyond managing my grief and navigating the dissolution of my marriage. I had somewhere to be, something to contribute. That evening, Mark came to the house to pick up more of his things. He paused when he saw me at the dining room table, surrounded by legal textbooks I'd borrowed from the library. "What's all this?" he asked. "I'm going back to work, at Chandler & Wise." He looked genuinely surprised. "Really? After all this time?" "Yes, really." I closed the book I'd been reading. "People reinvent themselves all the time, Mark. You certainly did." He flinched at that. Good. I wanted him to feel something, even if it was just discomfort. "I never meant to hurt you, Deb," he said, his voice low. "It just happened." "Nothing just happens," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "You made choices. Every day for 6 months, you chose her. Own that at least." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I've been seeing someone, a therapist, trying to understand why I did what I did." Part of me wanted to laugh. Of course he was in therapy, making his affair about his psychology, his needs, his journey. Another part of me, a tiny, shriveled part, still cared enough to hope he found answers. "I hope it helps," I said finally. "Jack needs a father who understands commitment. Emily, too." Mark nodded, then hesitated. "The divorce papers, your counteroffer, it's more than I expected." "It's what I deserve," I said simply. 15 years of supporting your career while setting mine aside. Primary custody with generous visitation. And yes, alimony until I'm established in my practice again. You've thought this through." "I've had time." I met his gaze directly. "I'm not trying to punish you, Mark. I'm advocating for myself. Something I should have done years ago." Something shifted in his expression then. Respect, maybe, or the realization that he was facing a version of me he'd never known. The woman who had existed before I molded myself to fit his expectations, before I became so focused on being a good wife that I forgot to be myself. He left with his boxes, and I returned to my studying. The next morning, an email arrived from his lawyer, accepting most of my terms. Not all, there would still be negotiations, but it was a start, a recognition of my worth. At work, I immersed myself in family law cases. The irony wasn't lost on me, advising clients through the same legal maze I was navigating in my personal life, but it gave me perspective. I wasn't alone in my pain or my recovery. Every day, people rebuilt their lives after betrayal. If they could do it, so could I. My first paycheck felt like a victory. I framed it before depositing it, a tangible reminder of my independence. That night, I invited Jane and my closest friends over to celebrate, not the end of my marriage, but the beginning of my reclamation. To Deborah, Jane toasted, raising her glass, who turned heartbreak into a comeback. We laughed and drank wine in the kitchen where, just months before, I had confronted Mark about his affair. The same space, transformed by new energy, new purpose. As I looked around at the women supporting me, I realized something important. I wasn't just finding my voice again. I was finding my people, the ones who saw me clearly and valued what they saw. Later, after everyone left, I sat on the porch swing Mark and I had installed when we first bought the house. The night was cool. Stars scattered across the sky like possibilities. For the first time since finding that lipstick stain, I felt genuine hope. Not just that I would survive this chapter, but that the next one might be even better. Written. In my own hand, with my own voice, on my own terms. Law had changed in 15 years. New precedents, new statutes, new technologies, all of it hit me like a tidal wave during my first month back at Chandler & Wise. While associates half my age navigated digital filing systems with ease, I fumbled through databases, squinting, at screens until my eyes burned. Pride kept me from asking for help, at least initially. I stayed late, arriving before sunrise and leaving long after sunset, determined to catch up. My first client was Rebecca, a 32-year-old kindergarten teacher whose husband had emptied their accounts before filing for divorce. Her story echoed mine in ways that made objectivity difficult. When she cried in my office, describing how blindsided she felt, I had to dig my nails into my palm to maintain professional composure. "He says I'm entitled to nothing," Rebecca whispered, twisting a tissue between her fingers. "That because he earned the money, it's his to keep." "That's not how the law works," I told her with quiet confidence. "And that's not how marriage works either. Your contributions matter, whether they generated income or not." She looked up, hope flickering across her tear-streaked face. "My lawyer before. He suggested I settle for less than half. Said fighting would cost more than it was worth." Something hardened inside me. "I'm not afraid of a fight, Rebecca. Not anymore." I threw myself into her case, researching precedents, late into the night, crafting arguments that would resonate with judges I'd once appeared before. Helen noticed my intensity, stopping by my office one evening as I prepared for Rebecca's hearing. "Don't make her case about your divorce," she warned, gently. "It's a recipe for burnout." "I'm being thorough," I protested. Helen's expression softened. "You're being personal, I get it. Just remember to draw boundaries, Deb, for your sake as much as hers." She was right, of course. I was channeling my own anger into Rebecca's case. But wasn't that why Helen hired me? For the perspective my personal situation provided? The trick was using that perspective without being consumed by it. The courtroom felt both foreign and familiar as I stood before Judge Watkins, arguing Rebecca's right to equitable distribution. Her husband's attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit, smirked when I approached the podium, as if my middle-aged female presence amused him. That smirk faded as I methodically dismantled his arguments, citing cases I'd handled before my hiatus and recent precedents I'd studied obsessively. When the judge ruled in Rebecca's favor, ordering a freeze on all marital assets pending final distribution, I felt a rush of vindication that transcended professional satisfaction. It wasn't just a win for Rebecca. It was a statement. Women like us wouldn't be discarded and diminished without consequence. My phone buzzed that evening as I drove home. Mark's number flashed on the screen. I answered through the car's speaker system. "Jack told me you won a big case today," he said, his voice tinny through the car speakers. "Word travels fast," I replied, surprised Jack had mentioned it to his father. "He's proud of you. We both are." The "we" struck me as presumptuous. Mark had forfeited the right to collective pride in my accomplishments. "Thanks," I said simply, unwilling to give him more. "Listen, Deb. Claire and I are thinking of getting a place together. I wanted you to hear it from me before the kids mentioned it." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Of course they were moving in together. The affair had blossomed into a relationship while the remnants of our marriage were still being divided in court. "Okay," I managed, my voice steady despite the sudden hollowness in my chest. "Is that all?" He paused, perhaps expecting a stronger reaction. "Yeah, that's all. Just wanted you to know." After hanging up, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and allowed myself 5 minutes of pure, unadulterated rage. I screamed into my closed car, pounded the steering wheel, let the tears come hot and fast. Then I checked my makeup in the mirror, reapplied my lipstick, and drove home. The house was dark when I arrived, Jack out with friends, and the silence engulfing me like a physical presence. I kicked off my heels, poured a glass of wine, and settled on the couch with case files. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows in a soothing rhythm. Work had become my refuge, the place where I felt competent and necessary. But sitting alone in the dark, I wondered if it was enough. If I was enough. The professional victories felt hollow without someone to share them with. The thought surprised me. I'd been so focused on surviving, on proving my worth, that I hadn't considered what thriving might actually look like. I set the files aside and reached instead for my laptop. After a moment's hesitation, I typed "evening, art classes Boston" into the search bar. Before children, before Mark, I'd loved painting. Perhaps it was time to reclaim that joy too. The art studio smelled of turpentine and possibility. Housed in a converted factory with exposed brick walls and massive windows, it felt worlds away from sterile courtrooms and legal briefs. For 3 hours every Wednesday evening, I traded legal pads for canvas, arguments for expression. No one knew me here as a lawyer or Mark Miller's ex-wife. I was just Deborah, the beginner with a tentative brushstroke and eager eyes. "Loosen your wrist," instructed Xavier, our bearded instructor who spoke with a faint Spanish accent. "You're thinking too much. Feel the movement." I laughed, something I'd been doing more frequently these days. Occupational hazard. Thinking is what I do for a living. "Then this is not living," he replied with a wink. "This is something else entirely." 4 weeks into the course, I was producing abstract landscapes that satisfied something in me I hadn't realized was hungry. The other students, mostly younger, with a few retirees, became casual friends. We'd sometimes grab drinks after class, discussing techniques and galleries rather than divorces and careers. It was refreshing to exist in a space untouched by my past. Until it wasn't. I was rinsing brushes at the large utility sink when a voice behind me said, "Deborah? Deborah. Miller?" I turned to find Claire standing there, a paintbrush in her hand and confusion on her face. My stomach dropped as recognition dawned. Of all the art classes in all of Boston, she had to walk into mine. "Claire," I acknowledged, proud of how level my voice sounded despite the adrenaline surging through me. "I didn't know you. Painted," she said awkwardly, fidgeting with her brush. "I'm full of surprises." The words came out sharper than intended. We stood in uncomfortable silence, the sound of water running into the sink between us. I should have been angry seeing her here, in the one space I'd carved out for myself untainted by my divorce. Instead, I felt strangely calm. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than the specter that had haunted my imagination. "I can find another class," she offered finally. I turned off the water and dried my hands. "Don't bother. I'm not going to let you take anything else from me." Her face flushed. "That's not fair. You don't know me." "And you didn't know me either when you started sleeping with my husband," I replied. "Yet here we are." Claire looked down at her hands. "I didn't know he was married at first, and when I found out, it was already complicated." I almost laughed at the euphemism. Complicated. As if 20 years of marriage, 2 children, and countless shared memories could be reduced to a word that mild. "Life's full of complications," I said. "The question is how we handle them." She glanced up, studying my face. "He said you were intimidating. I see what he meant now." The comment caught me off guard. Mark had found me intimidating. The thought was both surprising and oddly satisfying. For years, I dimmed myself to accommodate his ego, to be the supportive wife, rather than the formidable woman I'd been before we met. Perhaps that woman had never completely disappeared. "I'm taking that as a compliment," I told her. "It was meant as one." Claire hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for how things happened. Not for being with Mark now, but for the pain it caused you." Her distinction was carefully worded, legally precise. It struck me then that Claire wasn't so different from the woman I'd been at her age, ambitious, calculated, believing she could organize messy emotions into tidy compartments. "Life will teach you," I said, not unkindly. "It always does." When I returned to my easel, my hands were steady. I painted with newfound abandon that night, creating something wild and unexpected that made Xavier raise his eyebrows in approval. The anger I'd expected to feel upon seeing Claire had transformed into something more complex. A recognition that the woman who had played a role in destroying my marriage was just that. A woman. Not a villain. Not a vixen. Just another flawed human making questionable choices. The next morning, Emily called from college, her voice tense. "Dad told me he and Claire are moving in together. Did you know?" "Yes," I admitted. "He called me last week." "How can you be so calm about it?" she demanded. "It's like he's just replacing you, replacing our family, and everyone's supposed to be fine with it." I closed my eyes, picturing my daughter's face, so like mine, but with Mark's determined chin. "I'm not fine with it, Em. But I can't control what your father does. I can only control how I respond." "Well, I told him I won't be visiting them. Ever." "That's your choice," I said carefully. "But he's still your father. A father who broke your heart." Her loyalty warmed me even as it worried me. "My heart is tougher than I thought," I told her, "and this isn't your battle to fight." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the painting I'd brought home from class. Bold strokes of crimson and indigo collided on the canvas, creating something beautiful from conflict. It reminded me that pain could transform into art, that endings contained beginnings if you looked at them from the right angle. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. When I opened it, Jack stood on the porch, duffel bag in hand, eyes red-rimmed. "I had a fight with Dad," he admitted, shoulders slumping. "About Claire. Can I stay here for a few days?" I pulled him into a hug, feeling his tall frame fold into mine like he was still a little boy. "This is your home, Jack. Always." As we moved to the kitchen and I started making his favorite sandwich, I realized that healing wasn't linear. There would be days of progress followed by unexpected setbacks, moments of strength undermined by sudden vulnerability. But each time, we stumbled. We learned a little more about the landscape of our new reality. The cafe was busier than I expected for a Sunday morning. I arrived early, claiming a corner table with a good view of the door. Nervous energy had me rearranging the sugar packets, checking my reflection in a spoon, second-guessing my decision to come. When Daniel walked in, scanning the room with curious eyes, I almost didn't raise my hand to signal him. Almost. "Deborah?" he asked, approaching with a tentative smile. I nodded, returning his smile with one of my own. "Daniel, nice to finally meet you in person." We'd connected through an online forum for divorced professionals, not a dating site which had felt too presumptuous, but a support group of sorts. His comments had stood out. Thoughtful, often funny, never bitter despite his ex-wife leaving him for his former business partner. After weeks of exchanging messages about rebuilding life after betrayal, he'd suggested coffee. Just coffee, no pressure. Still, my stomach fluttered as he sat down across from me. Daniel was not what I'd expected. His profile photo showed a serious man in glasses, but in person. Laugh lines crinkled around his eyes, and his gestures were animated as he spoke about his work as an architect. He asked questions and actually listened to my answers, a novelty that shouldn't have been so surprising. "My daughter thinks I'm crazy for meeting a stranger from the internet," I admitted over my second cappuccino. He laughed. "My son said the same thing." Then he installed 3 different location tracking apps on my phone and made me promise to text when I arrived safely. They become the parents, don't they? I smiled, thinking of Jack's earnest concern when I mentioned meeting. "Daniel." "Circle of life," Daniel agreed, though I draw the line at them telling me when my bedtime is. The conversation flowed easily, skipping from children to careers to favorite hiking trails in New England. When he mentioned loving art museums, I told him about my painting class, including the awkward encounter with Claire. "That's cosmically unfair," he said, shaking his head. "Of all the classes in Boston." That's what I thought. But honestly, it was oddly liberating, seeing her as a person rather than the woman who stole my husband. Daniel considered this. No one can steal someone who doesn't want to be taken. The simple truth of his statement hit me with unexpected force. Mark hadn't been stolen. He had chosen to leave. And while that truth had once felt devastating, now it felt like release. He had made his choice. I was making mine. Coffee stretched into lunch. Lunch stretched into a walk along the Charles River, autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. When Daniel asked if I'd like to see an exhibition at the MFA the following weekend, I said yes, without hesitation. It wasn't a grand romance. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was connection, genuine and unexpected. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter, as if something had shifted inside me. Not because a man had shown interest, but because I had allowed myself to be interested, to be open to possibility again. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday, 9 months after I found the lipstick stain. My lawyer, Jane's colleague, not me, called with the news while I was preparing for court. "Congratulations," she said. "You're officially unmarried." I sat at my desk, absorbing the finality of it. 20 years of marriage, reduced to signed documents and legal terminology. I had expected to feel something monumental, grief or relief or vindication. Instead, I felt curiously quiet, as if watching the conclusion of a story I'd already emotionally finished. That evening, I invited Jane, Emily, and Jack for dinner. Not to celebrate the divorce, that felt wrong somehow, but to mark the occasion, to acknowledge the ending of one chapter and the beginning of another. A toast Jack proposed, raising his glass. At 19, he'd matured so much in the past year, shouldering family pain with grace that humbled me. To Mom, the strongest person I know. To Mom, Emily echoed, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Jane squeezed my hand under the table. To new beginnings. The phrase lingered in my mind long after they'd gone, as I moved through the house that was now legally, solely mine. New beginnings. They were everywhere if I looked for them. In the promotion Helen had mentioned yesterday, in the painting series I was preparing for a small local gallery, in the text from Daniel asking if I'd enjoyed the evening. I curled up on the window seat in my bedroom, a space I'd reclaimed by repainting the walls a deep teal Mark would have hated, and watched stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Betrayal had brought me here, to this quiet moment of contentment that felt like my own. The journey hadn't been one I would have chosen, but I couldn't regret where it had led me. My phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca, the client whose case had become something of a personal mission. Final settlement approved. You changed my life. Thank you. I smiled at the screen, remembering my own despair when Mark first left, how impossible it had seemed that anything good could follow such pain. If I could go back to that version of myself, the one standing in the kitchen with a lipstick-stained shirt in her hands, what would I tell her? Perhaps simply this: you are more than the love that left you. You are the strength that remained. Setting the phone aside, I opened my laptop and began typing. Not case notes or legal briefs, but the beginnings of something else entirely. My story, in my own words. Not because I'd fully healed or had all the answers, but because the act of claiming my narrative felt like the most powerful beginning of all.